The black market was alive with noise. Chains rattled, voices rose in anger. The smell of smoke and sweat filled the hall. Under the harsh light, dozens of beings stood on raised platforms, their bodies chained, their eyes hollow. They were not seen as people, only as property, weighed, judged, and sold. Among them stood a young alien girl, her skin pale blue, her frame thin from hunger. Her wrists were bound, her ankles bruised, her hair tangled from weeks of captivity. She lowered her head, hoping no one would notice her. But in this place, silence was not protection. The auctioneer, a tall creature with sharp tusks, pulled her forward. He grabbed her chin and forced her face up to the crowd. "Too small, too weak," he shouted, his voice carrying through the hall. "She is worth nothing but her weight, sold as pleasure meat, nothing more." The crowd roared with laughter, cruel eyes staring at her like she was an object. The girl shivered, not from cold, but from the heavy shame pressed on her shoulders. To them, she was not alive. She was a product, a thing to be owned. One alien in the crowd shouted a price. Another mocked and offered less. The auctioneer sneered, waving his hand, not even fit for labor, only for the lowest market. The girl felt her chest tighten, her breath shallow. She wished she could vanish. Every jeer, every laugh made her heart sink deeper. Her mind screamed to run, but the chains cut into her skin. This was her fate, to be traded like meat, to be forgotten. But among the crowd, there was one who did not laugh. A human stood near the back, his face half hidden under the shadow of a hood. His eyes did not carry the cruel light of the others. They burned with something different. He watched the girl, not with hunger, not with greed, but with anger. His hands curled into fists, the sound of the auctioneer's words cutting into him. He knew what this place was. He had seen it before, but this time something inside him snapped. The auctioneer slammed his staff on the ground. "Who will buy this one? Worthless but cheap." The hall grew louder. Bids were thrown like stones. Some offered a few credits. Some joked about weighing her like cattle. The girl kept her eyes on the ground, too afraid to meet their gaze. Her heart pounded, her hope fading with each word. But then, a voice rose, strong and steady, cutting through the noise. "I will take her." The crowd fell silent for a moment, heads turning. It was the human, his voice calm but sharp like steel. The auctioneer raised an eyebrow. A human, wasting credits on trash. Laughter broke again, but weaker this time, uneasy. The human stepped forward, his cloak shifting, his boots heavy on the metal floor. He did not look at the crowd. He looked only at the girl. His eyes locked on hers. And for the first time, she felt something strange. Not cruelty, not shame, but recognition. The auctioneer called out the price, expecting the human to back away. But he did not hesitate. He placed the credits down, firm and final. The sound echoed louder than the jeers, louder than the chains. The girl gasped, her mind spinning. She did not understand. Why would anyone pay for her? Why would a human waste anything on her? The crowd shouted in disbelief, some angry, some amused. But the auctioneer, bound by the rules of the market, slammed the staff down. Sold to the human. The girl's chains were released, her arms trembling as the weight fell away. She staggered forward, her legs weak, almost falling. The human caught her, his hand steady, his grip strong but gentle. She looked up at him, eyes wide, expecting cruelty, expecting orders. But he leaned close and whispered, "You are safe now." Her breath caught, her chest tightening in confusion and fear. Safe! The word felt alien to her ears. But in his voice there was no lie. The crowd murmured, whispers spreading like fire. A human buying worthless stock, a human speaking of safety. The auctioneer growled, suspicion in his eyes. This was no normal trade, and the black market did not forgive rebellion. As the human turned with the girl at his side, eyes followed, burning with anger and greed. He knew this would not end here. The fight had only begun. But he did not care because in that moment she was no longer meat. She was someone worth fighting for. The girl's steps were unsteady as the human led her off the platform. Her bare feet scraped against the cold floor, her chains clinking until the last lock fell free. For a heartbeat, she thought she had slipped into a dream, a strange vision that would shatter once she blinked. But the weight on her wrists was gone, and a steady hand guided her through the jeering crowd. Voices rose behind them, sharp with anger. Why would a human buy her? One alien spat. She's not worth the chain she wore. Another hissed. The laughter carried, mocking, cruel. The girl's head lowered again, shame pressing heavy. Yet a small spark of confusion burned. Why would he do this? The human walked with purpose, his shoulders broad, his movements calm but firm. He did not respond to the crowd, did not meet their eyes. Only once did he glance back, and the look in his eyes silenced more than a few voices. There was fire there, a warning, and even the boldest traders stepped aside. The auctioneer's tusked grin faded as he counted the credits. Something about this was wrong. This human was not a fool. He thought, no human would waste money on worthless stock. There had to be another reason, and reasons in the black market often meant trouble. He whispered to a guard. The guard slipped away into the shadows. The deal was done, but the story was far from over. The girl stumbled as they left the hall, her thin legs shaking. The human caught her arm, steadying her before she fell. "You're safe," he said again, his voice low. The word safe echoed in her ears like something forbidden. She could not believe it, not yet. She pulled slightly away, expecting a blow, but it never came. Instead, he loosened his grip, letting her walk on her own. Outside the hall, the night air hit her face. It was thick with smoke from ships, laced with the scent of fried food and burning fuel. Lights from the market stalls glowed red and green, shadows stretching like claws across the dirty streets. Here, too, the noise was endless, bargaining, shouting, laughter, but none of it was for her. None of it called her meat or flesh. She was invisible now, at least to strangers passing by. Her mind spun with fear, but also with the strange calm she felt beside him. He guided her down a narrow alley, away from the glow. She dared to speak, her voice weak, almost a whisper. "Why?" The human looked down at her, his jaw tight, his eyes forward. "Because you deserve more than chains," he answered simply. His words made no sense to her. Deserve? It was not a word she knew, not a word the market had ever taught. Behind them, shadows moved. Slavers who had watched the purchase followed, their eyes glinting with greed. One hissed to another, "He thinks he owns her, but no one leaves with market stock without paying the true price." Their footsteps echoed against metal walls as they stalked closer. The human noticed, his hand drifting to his side where a weapon rested. He did not slow, but his muscles tensed, ready. The girl saw the hunters too, her breath quickening. Her body shook, fear rising again like a wave. But the human's calm presence anchored her, his stride steady, his grip on her shoulder firm. They reached a steel door, half hidden, and he pressed a code into a worn panel. The lock clicked, the door slid open, and he guided her inside. The passage beyond was narrow and dim, but it was quiet. The sounds of the market faded behind the heavy door. They entered a chamber lit by a faint glow. The air was cooler here, less poisoned. The girl sank to the floor, her chest rising and falling as if she had been running for days. The human crouched near her, his voice calm. "No one will hurt you while I breathe." She blinked at him, the words strange, impossible. No one had ever spoken for her life. No one had ever promised protection. Outside, the slavers reached the closed door. They snarled and argued, one pounding a fist against the steel. "This isn't over," a voice growled, and it wasn't. The human knew it. The girl felt it. The black market never released its grip so easily. But inside that hidden chamber, for the first time since she could remember, she was not a product. She was not weighed, not mocked, not chained. For the first time, she was seen. The human sat across from her, silent, watchful. She studied him, his broad shoulders, the scars across his hands, the steady fire in his eyes. He was unlike anyone she had ever known. Not cruel, not careless, not blind. And though she did not understand why, she felt something stir inside her chest. A fragile seed of hope. Hope that perhaps his words were true. Hope that perhaps she could be more than what the market named her. And in the silence, that hope grew. The hidden chamber was quiet, but the silence did not last. The girl sat with her knees pulled to her chest, listening to the faint hum of machines in the walls. Her eyes followed the human as he checked the corners, adjusting panels, typing quick commands into an old console. She could not understand all of it, but she could see one thing clear. He was preparing to leave. Her heart pounded, fear crawling back. Leave. The word meant danger. The slavers would hunt them, and she would be dragged back into chains. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came. The human looked at her then, his eyes calm but sharp. "You must trust me," he said. Trust, another strange word, heavy and confusing. But when she met his gaze, something in her chest steadied. He was not like the others. The sound of metal striking metal echoed outside the chamber. Voices shouted, rough and angry. The girl froze, her thin body trembling. The human moved quickly, pulling a small pack from the wall, sliding it over his shoulder. Then he reached out and offered his hand. "Come," he said, firm but not harsh. She hesitated only a moment before placing her fragile hand in his. Warmth flowed from his skin into hers, steadying her legs. They slipped through another passage, the steel floor creaking under their steps. Lights flickered above, broken and dim. The smell of oil and smoke grew stronger as they moved closer to the docks. Behind them, heavy footsteps followed. The hunters were close. The human quickened his pace, his grip strong. The girl stumbled once, her feet raw against the rough floor. Without hesitation, he lifted her, carrying her in his arms as if she weighed nothing. Her breath caught, and used to such care, and used to being held without cruelty. They burst into a wide corridor lined with stalls and flickering neon signs. Crowds of traders and mercenaries filled the space. The human kept his hood low, weaving through the chaos. But whispers spread quickly. "A human with stolen stock," one hissed. "Market law will not forgive this," another growled. The girl buried her face against his chest, fear rising like fire. She could feel the eyes on her, the judgment, the hate. Yet she also felt the steady rhythm of his heart, unshaken, unafraid. Slavers appeared ahead, blocking the main exit, their weapons gleaming in the neon light. The human stopped, his stance wide, his eyes cold. The girl gasped as he set her down gently behind him. The slavers sneered. "Give her back, human. She belongs to us." The human's voice cut through their laughter, calm but unyielding. "She belongs to no one." Blades flashed. Energy pistols hummed. The crowd backed away, eager for blood. The human moved fast, faster than the girl thought possible. He struck one slaver with the butt of his weapon, another with a sharp kick that sent the alien sprawling. Shots rang out, sparks flying as beams scorched the walls. He pulled the girl close, shielding her as they pressed toward a side exit. Fear and awe twisted inside her. She had never seen anyone fight for her, never seen anyone risk so much. They darted into another alley, shadows swallowing them whole. The air was damp, dripping with steam from broken pipes. The girl coughed, her chest tight, but the human never slowed, carrying her again when her legs faltered. Behind them, shouts grew louder, footsteps pounding closer. The chase was not over. At last they reached a docking bay, the massive doors groaning open. Inside sat a worn but sturdy ship, its hull scratched, its lights dim but alive. The girl stared at it with wide eyes. She had seen ships before, but never one that meant freedom. The human rushed them aboard, sealing the hatch behind. Alarms blared, slavers poured into the bay, pounding on the exterior. The girl's breath shook, her body pressed against the cold walls of the cabin. Would they escape, or would the market claim her again? The engines roared, trembling beneath her feet. The human's hands danced across the controls, his face hard with focus. The ship lifted, shuddering, straining against the hold of the bay. Blaster fire slammed against the shields, rocking them side to side. The girl screamed, gripping the seat with all her strength. But the human did not waver, his voice strong above the chaos. "Hold on, I will get you out." The docking bay doors opened wider. The ship pushed through. Stars spread across the black sky, endless and cold. The human pulled them free with a sharp surge, engines burning bright. The slavers' ships gave chase, their red lights flashing like angry eyes. But for the first time, the girl felt something she had never felt before. Not only fear, but hope. Hope that maybe this fight was not the end, but a beginning. And as the stars filled her vision, she clutched the seat and whispered, "Why me?" The human glanced at her, his jaw set, his eyes steady. "Because you are worth more than they will ever understand," he said. And with those words, he pushed the ship faster into the endless dark, leaving behind the market, the chains, the weight of shame, but carrying with them a fragile light, a light that could not be sold, weighed, or broken. The ship cut through the stars, leaving the black market far behind. The engines hummed low, a steady sound in the silence of space. The girl sat on a narrow seat, her knees drawn close, her thin arms wrapped around them. Her eyes flicked across the small cabin, the blinking lights, the glowing screens, the faint reflection of herself on the glass. She looked away quickly, as if ashamed of her own image. The human moved between panels, checking readouts, his hands sure and steady. The ship was old, scarred from years of use, but it obeyed him like a loyal beast. He adjusted the shields, scanned for pursuers, and at last let out a quiet breath. For the moment, they were safe. He turned to her, his eyes softening. "You need food," he said, his voice calm but firm. She flinched at first, expecting a command, a strike, something cruel. But instead, he set a small package in front of her. Wrapped rations, nothing fine, but better than the scraps she had once been thrown. Her hand shook as she reached for it, staring as if it were a trap. When she looked at him, he only nodded. "Eat." She tore it open, the smell filling her nose. The first bite was dry, but it was warm. She chewed slowly, almost painfully, as if the act itself was strange. The human sat across from her, not rushing, not demanding, only watching to make sure she did not choke. For the first time, she ate without fear of a whip, without fear of being mocked for her hunger. Her voice was small when she finally spoke. "Why save me?" The human leaned back, his face shadowed by the dim light. "Because no one deserves to be sold," he answered. She frowned, the words confusing. No one. The market had told her every day she was nothing but weight, flesh, a price. "Even me," she whispered. He nodded. "Especially you." She looked down, her heart racing in her chest. Something heavy stirred inside her, a feeling she did not know how to name. For so long she had been invisible, only numbers and chains. But this human spoke as if she mattered. The thought was frightening, like standing at the edge of a great height. And yet, part of her wanted to believe. The ship shuddered, a sharp alarm flashing red across the cabin. The human's expression hardened. He moved quickly to the controls, scanning the readouts. The girl froze, clutching the seat as fear surged again. "What is it?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Trackers," he muttered, his hands flying over the console. "They put a beacon on you. Or maybe on me. They're still coming." The girl's chest tightened, her food turning to stone in her stomach. She touched her arms, her neck, searching for hidden metal, her eyes wide with terror. "They will find us. They always find us." The human turned sharply, his voice cutting through her panic. "They will try, but I will not let them." The words struck her like a blow, not in pain, but in shock. No one had ever promised to protect her. No one had ever spoken against the will of the market. Her throat tightened, her hands clutching the fabric of her worn dress. She wanted to believe, but fear clung to her like chains that would never fall. The human guided the ship toward a belt of shattered asteroids. Rocks floated like silent giants, their surfaces scarred and broken. He maneuvered through them with practiced ease, hiding them in shadows, masking their signal. The girl watched him, her eyes wide. Every movement he made was with purpose, no hesitation, no fear. She whispered, "You fight them like you have before." He nodded once, his eyes fixed on the stars. "I have seen slavers. I know how they hunt." "And you always win?" she asked quietly. His lips curved, not a smile, but something close. "I win enough to keep going." The girl lowered her gaze, her voice almost lost in the hum of the ship. "Will you keep me?" The words slipped out before she could stop them. Her cheeks flushed with shame, her chest heavy. She feared his answer, feared he would laugh like the others. But the human's voice was steady. "I will keep you safe, if that is what you want." Her breath caught, her eyes filling with tears she had long forgotten how to shed. She turned her face away, not wanting him to see. But in that moment, something shifted. The fear was still there, but beneath it grew a fragile thread of trust. Thin as glass, but alive, the human leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes for a brief moment. The girl studied him in silence, the scars on his face, the weight in his shoulders. He was not like the traders, not like the hunters. He was strong, but his strength was not cruel. It was a shield, not a weapon. And for the first time in her life, she felt the faintest spark of safety. Outside the ship, shadows stirred, signals flashing in the dark. The slavers had not given up. Their bounty was too rich. The hunt was still on, and soon their path would cross again. But inside the ship, in that fragile silence, a bond had begun. Not of chains, not of weight, but of trust. And trust was something no market could ever sell. The asteroid belt stretched wide, broken rocks drifting in slow silence. The human guided the ship between them, each move sharp and careful. The girl sat close, her thin fingers gripping the edge of her seat, her eyes wide. Every shadow felt like danger. Every flicker on the screen made her heart race. She wanted to believe his words, that he would protect her, but fear was heavy. The market never let go. The hunters never stopped. And soon the scanners began to flash red. Signals? Closing fast. The human cursed under his breath, his hands moving quick across the console. "They found us," he said, his voice low, steady but tense. The girl trembled, pressing her back against the cold wall. "Will they take me back?" she whispered. He glanced at her, fire in his eyes. "They will try, but they will not succeed." The first mercenary ship appeared from behind a cluster of rocks, its hull dark, its weapons glowing red. Another ship followed, then another, circling like wolves around prey. The human tightened his grip on the controls. "They want us alive," he muttered, "or at least they want you alive." The mercenaries opened fire, beams slicing through the void. The ship shuddered, alarms screamed, sparks flashing from a console. The girl cried out, her hands covering her ears. The human reached across, steadying the systems, forcing the ship into a hard dive between asteroids. The rocks shielded them for a moment, but the hunters pressed closer. The girl's voice shook. "We cannot escape. There are too many." The human's jaw clenched, sweat on his brow. "We do not run forever," he said. "Sometimes we fight." His hands flew across the weapons panel, old guns powering up. The girl gasped as the cannons fired, bolts of light crashing into the lead mercenary ship. The blast tore across its wing, spinning it away into the rocks. One down, but more remained. The hunters swarmed, weapons blazing, their ships faster and stronger. The human moved with calm fury, weaving through narrow gaps, striking when he could. The girl clung to the seat, her body shaking. But through the fear, she watched him. Every move he made was to protect her, not himself. And something stirred deep inside her chest, a strength she had not known. Another blast rocked the cabin, throwing sparks across the floor. The human grunted, his arm grazed by shrapnel, blood staining his sleeve. The girl cried out, reaching for him. But he pushed her hand aside, his eyes still locked on the battle. Not yet, he growled. We are not done. Her tears burned, her breath ragged. She saw the mercenaries pressing closer, their weapons locking on. The ship's system screamed, warning of overload. Her gaze fell to the console, wires exposed, switches flashing. She remembered his words, trust, and something in her heart shifted. For the first time, she wanted to fight. She slid from her seat, ignoring his shout, crawling toward the sparking panel. Her thin hands moved clumsy at first, then faster, pulling wires, flipping switches. Pain jolted through her fingers as sparks bit her skin. But the alarms changed, the overload cut off, power shifted back to the shields. The human glanced at her, shock flashing in his eyes. You, he said, almost in disbelief. She met his gaze, trembling but firm. I will not go back. The human's lips curved, a hard smile. Good, he said, turning back to the fight. Together they struck again, his hands guiding the guns, her small fingers holding the failing system steady. A second mercenary ship exploded in fire, broken pieces scattering into the rocks. The last two faltered, pulling back, their signals fading into the dark. Silence filled the cabin, broken only by the hum of the engines. The girl collapsed back in her seat, her chest heaving, her hands blistered. The human leaned back, blood still on his arm, but his eyes fixed on her. You saved us, he said, his voice low, almost proud. She shook her head, her lips trembling. No, you saved me. He leaned closer, his gaze steady. We saved each other. The girl looked down at her burned fingers, then back at him. Her chest ached, but not only from fear. It ached from something new, something warm. For the first time, she had fought for herself, for him, for freedom. And he had seen her, not as weak, not as weight, but as equal. Outside the shattered belt, the stars stretched endless and bright. The hunters would return, she knew. The market would not forget. But inside the ship, she felt something she had never known before. She felt alive, and though the fear still lingered, hope burned stronger. A fragile flame, but one that would not go out. The ship drifted through open space, the wreckage of the battle fading behind them. The hum of the engines was steady, but weak. Panels flickered with damage, and the smell of smoke lingered. The girl sat on the floor, her back against the wall, her hands blistered from sparks, her body trembling from exhaustion. Yet her eyes were fixed on the human, his arm bleeding freely, his face pale but unyielding. He slumped in the pilot's chair, his breath sharp. The wound on his arm was deep, scorched by shrapnel, the fabric around it soaked red. He tried to move, tried to adjust controls, but his body resisted. Still, he pressed on, his jaw tight. As if pain was an enemy he refused to surrender to. The girl crawled closer, her fear mixing with something else. Before, she would have waited for orders, too afraid to act. But now, after the battle, after feeling his trust in her, she could not sit still. Let me, she whispered, her voice unsteady but firm. He shook his head. It's nothing. She stared at the blood dripping onto the floor, her hands trembling. It is not nothing, she said, her voice rising for the first time. Her words surprised even herself, but she did not stop. You saved me. You fight for me. Let me help you. He looked at her then, his eyes tired but burning with that same strange fire. Finally, he gave a small nod. She searched the cabin, fumbling through compartments until she found a kit of rough supplies. Her hands shook as she tore the cloth, as she cleaned the wound. The smell of blood made her gag, but she forced herself to keep going. Every time he winced, she whispered softly, sorry. Her voice broke, but her fingers kept moving, steady despite the fear. When the wound was wrapped, she leaned back, staring at her own hands. Burned, bloody, but steady. The human flexed his arm, testing, then nodded. You did well, he said, simple words but heavy. Her chest tightened. Her eyes stung. No one had ever told her those words before. Not well, not good, not anything but worthless. Hearing them now was like feeling sunlight after years in the dark. She lowered her head, her voice barely a whisper. No one ever cared if I lived or died. Not until you... He leaned forward, his voice firm. Dignity is not given. It is claimed. You are more than they said, more than they ever let you believe. Her eyes widened, her heart pounding. She wanted to argue, to say she was nothing, that the chains proved it. But deep inside, a voice whispered different, a voice she had not heard before. Maybe he was right. The silence between them was heavy, but not cold. It was the silence of something growing, something fragile. The girl hugged her knees to her chest, her eyes staring at the floor. But inside her chest, the seed of hope sprouted. She remembered his words in the battle. We saved each other. The thought echoed, shaking the chains still clinging to her soul. Outside, the stars shifted as the ship changed course. The human adjusted what controls he could, scanning the dark. The slavers will regroup, he muttered. They will not stop. The girl shivered, fears still sharp. But he continued, his voice hard as steel. We will not stop either. She looked at him, her lips parting. Why fight so much for me? She asked, her voice trembling. He met her eyes, and for a moment the weight of his soul was visible. Because they see you as nothing, but I see the truth, he said. Her breath caught, confusion and warmth flooding her chest. Truth, worth, dignity, these were words she barely understood. But hearing them from him made her want to believe. The ship's console beeped, signals flashing red again. The girl tensed, her body stiff. The human's gaze darkened, scanning the readings. They are gathering. More than before, he said quietly. Her stomach dropped, fear clawing at her heart. But then she looked at him, and instead of despair, she felt something else. She felt the strength of his fire, and for the first time, she wanted to share it. She moved closer, sitting beside him, her shoulder brushing his arm. I will not run this time, she whispered, her voice shaking but firm. He turned his head, surprise in his eyes. You are brave, he said. No, she replied, her gaze fixed on the stars beyond the glass. I am learning to be. Outside, shadows of ships gathered on the edge of the scanners. The hunters were coming, stronger than before. The girl's hands curled into fists, no longer trembling as much. She had been property, weighed like meat, mocked as worthless. But now, sitting beside him, she felt something stir. She was more, and she would prove it. The battle to come would test them, break them, or forge them. The market wanted to reclaim its prize. But she was no longer a prize, no longer stock, no longer silent. For the first time in her life, she felt awake. And awake, she would not go back. The ship's scanner screamed as the shadows closed in. Red lights flickered across the cabin, warning of incoming fire. The girl sat beside the human, her thin hands gripping the armrest, but her eyes no longer lowered. Fear still lived inside her, but now it burned beside something stronger. The hunters came in numbers, ships forming a net across the stars. Voices cracked over the comm, harsh and mocking. Give her back, human. She is market stock, not yours. Another voice laughed. We will weigh her again, sell her by the pound. Your fight is useless. The girl's stomach twisted, old chains pressing heavy in her memory. But when she looked at the human, she saw no fear, only fire. He rose from his seat, standing tall despite the wound on his arm. He pressed a button, opening the comm, his voice echoing across the void. She belongs to no one. Not to you. Not to your market. Not anymore. His words rang strong, defiant. The hunters roared in anger. Weapons charged. The battle began. Blasts shook the cabin. Shields flared and cracked. The human gripped the controls, weaving through fire, returning shot for shot. The girl braced herself, her body trembling, but she refused to hide. She leaned forward, scanning the consoles, pointing out threats, calling warnings. Each time she spoke, he listened, and together they moved as one. A mercenary ship locked onto them, charging a heavy cannon. The girl's heart raced, panic rising. But she remembered the sparking panel from before, remembered the pain of sparks on her hands. She leapt from her seat, crawling toward the wires again. Not this time, she whispered, pulling switches, rerouting power. The ship's shields flared brighter, the cannon strike glancing off instead of piercing through. The human glanced back, pride flashing in his eyes. "You're learning fast," he said. Her lips trembled, but she nodded. "I will fight too." The hunters pressed harder, circling, their net closing. The human breathed hard, his face set in grim determination. "This is their last push," he muttered. "They will not stop unless we break them." He pulled the ship into a sharp climb, rising above the pack. The girl held tight, her body tossed against the seat. The stars spun, the hunters followed. The human triggered the cannons, his aim sharp. 2 ships exploded in bursts of fire. The girl gasped, the light of the blast reflecting in her wide eyes. The net was breaking, but one last ship surged forward, larger, heavier, its weapons glowing bright. The leader, the one who had commanded her sail, the auctioneer himself. His tusked face filled the calm, his voice a growl. "You cannot steal from the market. Human, you cannot give value to trash." The girl froze, her chest tightening, old fear rising like a storm. But the human's hand touched her shoulder, steady and strong. "You are not trash," he said firmly. His words struck deep, burning away the shame. She lifted her head, her voice steady for the first time. "I'm not trash," she whispered, then louder. "I am not yours." The auctioneer roared, firing every weapon at once. The ship shuddered, alarms blaring, sparks raining down. The girl's hands flew across the panel, keeping systems alive. The human pushed the ship into a dive, sliding under the massive vessel. With one final surge, he fired, the cannons ripping into the leader's engines. The explosion lit the stars, tearing the auctioneer's ship apart. The rest of the hunters scattered, broken, leaderless, fleeing into the void. Silence followed, heavy and endless. The girl slumped back, her chest heaving, her blistered hands shaking. The human leaned in his chair, his breaths rough but steady. The scanners cleared, no more signals, no more hunters. They had won. The girl turned slowly, her eyes meeting his. Her lips parted, words trembling. "They will never stop. The market will always hunt." He nodded, his gaze firm. "Then we will always fight." Her chest ached, but it was not only fear. It was something deeper, something brighter. She touched her chest, her voice soft. "For the first time, I feel alive." He looked at her, his eyes softening. "You are not what they said you were. You are worth more than any price." Her tears fell then, silent but free. She had been weighed, mocked, chained, but now, beside him, she was none of those things. She was not meat, not property, not stock. She was someone. The stars stretched endless before them, a path without chains. The market was behind, the future unknown. But in that moment, she was no longer afraid, because she was not alone. She had found her worth, not in weight, not in price, but in dignity. And one human had fought the galaxy to give it back to her.